Integrating sources, building credibility, and avoiding plagiarism. First, I think it's fair to ask, why do we even need to integrate sources? Well, in a research paper or any kind of synthesis paper where you've been instructed to conduct research, knowing how to effectively integrate sources is extremely important because it helps you do the following. Bolster your point with the credibility or reputation of an authority. Identify others' opinions, theories, and personal explanations. Present assertions of fact that are open to dispute. Present statistics. Establish your ethos as a reliable scholar and researcher. And it also lets readers know where to find information on your topic if they want to conduct their own research. We have three main methods for integrating source material into our own arguments. We can summarize, we can paraphrase, or we can quote directly. In a summary, you're condensing the main ideas. It's a relatively brief objective account that you're writing in your own words of the main ideas of a source or source passage. Again, the key word here is to condense. With a paraphrase, the key word is to restate, again in your own words. The structure often reflects but does not directly copy the structure of the source passage. While a summary is shorter, a paraphrase may be roughly the same length as the passage. Sometimes a paraphrase is even longer than the original passage, especially when the original uses a lot of jargon and you have to take some extra time to explain what things mean. And then direct quotation is obviously using the exact words of the source. You will want to summarize and paraphrase most often in your research paper, using direct quotes sparingly. Putting your source material in your own words shows that you have a true understanding of that material. Also, to restate in your own words the full meaning of a phrase or passage helps readers understand difficult, complex, sometimes jargon-riddled, or even ambiguous passages. These passages, if quoted, will have to be explained more fully anyway in order for your reader to understand them. And it also increases the prevalence of your voice because remember, it's your paper. Summarizing and paraphrasing is kind of tricky, paraphrasing in particular. In order to write a summary or paraphrase, first read and reread your source multiple times until you understand exactly what it is saying. Then write down the most relevant information from the source. Try explaining the content of the source to someone else. This could just be trying to speak it out loud, maybe even recording a voice memo in case it's really great and you want to use it. Next, rewrite the information in your own words and sentences so it becomes a coherent part of your paper written in your own style. Always include parenthetical citations anytime you summarize and paraphrase. It might be your own words, but if it's not your idea, you have to give credit to the original source. And here's a big, huge warning. Changing a few of the words by using a thesaurus is not enough to protect you from potential plagiarism. The material needs to be distinctly different from the original. So please use the steps above to learn how to do this effectively. Anytime you use direct quotation, you ought to have a good reason for doing so. Here are a few reasons that you might want to quote something directly. Sometimes the original cannot be expressed any more clearly or concisely than it already has been. Sometimes the original phrasing is particularly vivid or striking. If it's beautifully written, you probably want to include that in your own paper. Perhaps you intend to closely analyze parts of the original passage. This is likely to happen if you're doing a literary paper. It's also likely to happen if you're looking at some kind of law or proposal and you need to really look at what people are saying. Maybe you're criticizing or disagreeing with a source. That makes the reader really need extra evidence so that they trust you. They need to hear the exact wording of the original in order to trust that you're not misrepresenting it. And finally, sometimes the person who is speaking is really an authoritative source on the topic, and you want to have their exact words to help increase your own credibility. At the same time, do not allow your quotes to speak for themselves. Always discuss the significance of the quotation in relation to your claim. Do not use quotes as padding. This relates to the previous tips to only quote directly if you have a good reason for doing so. If we get a paper that's almost all quotation, then you didn't really do much of your own writing. And this relates to this tip. Only cite the words and phrases from the passage that are most significant to your point. It is usually unnecessary to quote more than a sentence or even part of a sentence. If you have more than a couple of quotes that exceed 3 lines, look at your quotes again and determine what could be paraphrased or even omitted. Using attributive phrases is a really great way to smoothly integrate source material into your writing. Mentioning the expert's name and their credentials as part of the introduction to a quote is sometimes called an attributive phrase. These can be used regardless of whether you're summarizing, paraphrasing, or quoting directly. Including the author's credentials is really important. Otherwise, your readers won't know why they should care what this person, whom they have probably never heard of, has to say. Attributive phrases also signal to readers when you're shifting out of your own idea and into someone else's. This is why they are sometimes called signal phrases. Let's look at a couple of examples. This first example, we have material that is paraphrased. We know this because we don't have a direct quote. Notice I bolded the attributive phrase, according to Susan Silby, a professor of sociology and behavioral sciences at MIT. I didn't know who Susan Silby was, so the writer told me, and she sounds like a pretty credible person when it comes to my research topic. Notice that she uses statistics here, and they're paraphrased. While we can paraphrase almost anything, statistics are almost always paraphrased rather than quoted directly. You'll also notice there's no parenthetical citation at the end of this source, and that is because the name she mentioned in the sentence, Susan Silby, is also the author of the source. So when I go look at the works cited page, I'm going to see the last name Silby. That's how I know where this information came from. I'll provide more information about that in a video about in-text citations. Here's another example, this time of a direct quotation, according to Maren McKinnon, a science research fellow at the Australian National University. And then she gives a little bit of paraphrasing, having more female role models, and then she gets into the quotation and blends it smoothly into her sentence. Also notice that the writer provides commentary after the quotation that gives her own viewpoint about the quote. The same idea here as in the previous example applies regarding the parenthetical citation. Maren McKinnon is the author of this source. Her name will appear in the works cited page, therefore I don't actually have to include the parenthetical citation. While the most common way to begin an attributive phrase is to say according to so-and-so, there are other options. Vary the openings of these sentences by using some of the verbs in this chart. Just make sure that the meaning of the verb you choose fits the context of your sentence. You can have your own copy of this chart in the descriptions to the video. So let's briefly summarize. What did you learn? The 3 ways to integrate source material are to summarize, paraphrase, and quote directly. You must always have a good reason for quoting directly. You need to completely rewrite anything you're paraphrasing to avoid accidental plagiarism. Always introduce source material with attributive phrases that highlight its authoritativeness. And finally, always cite source material regardless of whether you summarize, paraphrase, or quote directly.